Anarcho-capitalism, or free market anarchy, isn't a movement. There are no known collectives or groups in the real world pushing for such an ideology. The existence of such a movement, if it can even be called that, exists mostly on YouTube and the internet. So one might wonder why I've even bothered to criticize such a marginal fringe movement. I hope to clear that up in this video. Anarchists disagree with one another. It's our history, and in my opinion, it's the natural result of really believing in individual liberty. It is natural and important that free-thinking people come to their own conclusions and disagree about things. As Warren puts it, anarchism is not a fixed, self-enclosed social system, but rather a definite trend in the historic development of mankind, which in contrast with the intellectual guardianship of all clerical and governmental institutions, strives for the free, unhindered unfolding of all the individual and social forces in life. With this in mind, it is understandable that our free market anarchists would ask, if anarchism is not a fixed, self-enclosed social system, on what grounds would you exclude free market anarchy? Free market anarchy in particular, and the libertarian right in general, have all the markings of a fascist movement. They wrap themselves in the ideology, slogans, and symbols of the left while helping to maintain the status quo. Market anarchy, like all previous fascist movements, presents a false revolution, one that would dismantle any vestiges of democracy and replace it with the pure tyranny of capitalism. Unfortunately, fascism has little or no meaning to most people. It's a bad word thrown at people as an ad hominem attack that hopes to end all argument. You're a fascist. End of story. There's also the unfortunate fact that people see fascism as an irrational system. Hitler and Mussolini were just crazy. Seldom are we tasked with answering, why fascism? What was its functions? And who did it really serve? Fascism is a rational reaction of capitalists to maintain the status quo. Fascists use left-wing slogans and ideology in order to sell their idea of revolution while maintaining their class privilege. Take a look at Hitler speaking to the German youth.
Keine Klassen und Stände mehr sehen, und ihr dürft ihn euch schon nicht mehr groß werden lassen. Eine große Idee. Und wir wissen, dass für Millionen unserer Volksgenossen die Arbeit nicht mehr ein trennender Begriff sein wird, sondern ein alle gemeinsam verbindender. Und dass insbesondere keiner mehr dann in Deutschland leben wird, der in der Arbeit der Faust Minderes sehen wird als in irgendeiner anderen Arbeit. Durch eure Schule wird die ganze Nation gehen. Die Zeit wird kommen, da kein Deutscher hineinwachsen kann in die Gemeinschaft dieses Volkes, der nicht erst durch eure Gemeinschaft gegangen ist.
He uses all the wonderful ideas of the left, and he employed none of their substance. Here's an excerpt from Michael Parenti on the subject.
But what distinguished fascism was the way it attempted to cultivate a revolutionary aura and give the impression of being a mass movement. Fascism offers a really beguiling mix of revolutionary-sounding mass appeals and reactionary class politics. You want to sum it up. The Nazi Party's full name, as you know, was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. I mean, they very consciously left-sounding, stealing the... Fascism, in fact, is a false revolution. It makes a revolutionary appeal without making an actual revolution.
Free market anarchists use similar tactics, and it should be pointed out that most of the people on YouTube who espouse such ideas certainly do not understand what they are doing. After all, Hitler didn't kill 6 million Jews with his bare hands. He had to convince a lot of well-intentioned people that his ideology was revolutionary, that it was going to save humanity in Germany. Most of the ideologues here on YouTube are well-intentioned people who have simply fallen for a false revolutionary ideal. This can be confusing for those who either assume or pretend to know that the Nazis and Italian fascists were socialists. This goes back to their use, but ultimate disregard, of leftist slogans mentioned earlier. Much has been written about the various groups who supported Hitler and Mussolini. Some of the wealthy supported them, some did not. But a more insightful approach can be found in looking at who Mussolini and Hitler supported once they got into power. Again, we turn to political analyst Michael Parenti.
Support once they seized state power. In both countries, a strikingly similar agenda was pursued. Labor unions and strikes were outlawed. Union property and publications were confiscated. Farm cooperatives were handed over to rich private owners. Big agribusiness farming was heavily subsidized. In Italy, child labor was reintroduced. In both Germany and Italy, the already modest wages of the workers were cut drastically. In Germany, from 25 to 40% cuts. In Italy, 50% wages cut. These were already rather modest wages as it was. In both countries, minimum wage laws, overtime pay, and factory safety regulations were abolished or turned into dead letters. Taxes were increased for the general populace, but lowered or eliminated for the rich and big business. Inheritance taxes for the wealthy were greatly reduced or abolished. Both Mussolini and Hitler showed their gratitude to their business patrons by handing over to them publicly owned and perfectly solvent steel mills, power plants, banks, steamship companies. Privatization, it's called. Privatization. Both regimes dipped heavily into the public treasury to refloat or subsidize heavy industry. Corporate welfareism, we would call it today. Both states guaranteed a return on the capital invested by giant corporations and assumed most of the risks and losses on investment. Sounds like savings and loan, if you ask me. As in all reactionary regimes, public capital was raided by private capital. The result of all of this? In Italy during the 1930s, the economy was gripped by recession, a staggering public debt, widespread corruption, but industrial profits rose. And the armaments factories busily rolled out the weapons. In Germany, unemployment was eased somewhat because there was a massive depression when they came in. And it was eased because of the massive arms program and the arms spending. But generally, poverty increased. I mean, if you cut wages 25 to 40%, poverty is increased no matter how many jobs you might create. But from 1935 to 1943, the net income of German corporate leaders rose 46%. In both countries, the conditions of labor deteriorated greatly. Speed-ups, dismissals, imprisonment for workers who complained about unsafe or inhumane work conditions, longer hours for less wages. You know, looking at this...
My point is not to compare modern anarcho-capitalist to Mussolini or Hitler, but to illustrate the function of fascism. And the function of fascism, like the function of anarcho-capitalism, is to maintain the privilege and the status of the elite. It wraps itself in a false ideology of revolution, when in reality, it's nothing of the sort.